If you're going to improve your freedom, that's going to lead to an improvement in prosperity. If you're going to decrease your freedom, that's going to lead to a decrease in prosperity.
Welcome to Acton Line, a product of the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion and Liberty. I'm Eric Cohn, executive producer. In today's episode, Joseph Lemoine, deputy director of the Freedom and Prosperity Center at the Atlantic Council, joins Stephen Barrows, Acton's chief operating officer, to discuss the Atlantic Council's recently released 2023 Freedom and Prosperity Indexes. The Atlantic Council's Freedom and Prosperity Center created these indexes to provide a snapshot of the current distribution of freedom and prosperity, gain a sense of the evolution of both over the last 28 years at global, regional, and country levels, and facilitate an exploration of the relationship between freedom and prosperity. A distinctive aspect of the Freedom and Prosperity Indexes is their root in and reflection of an expansive understanding of what constitutes a free and prosperous society. The Freedom Index includes measures of economic, political, and legal freedom. This broader definition of freedom differentiates the index from other measures focused on specific institutional aspects like electoral, corruption, economic openness, and so on. Likewise, the Prosperity Index is more exhaustive than previous measurement projects such as the United Nations Human Development Index or various poverty indexes. Their rationale for this approach is based on the premise that we can gain new insights and better understand the mechanisms that lead to overall prosperity by analyzing the relationship and interconnections between different dimensions of freedom. You can find additional resources in the show notes for this episode, as well as find previous episodes of Acton Line on our website at acton.org/actonline. And if you like this program, you can help us reach even more listeners by sharing it with a friend and leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We welcome your comments as well. Acton Line is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
Welcome, everybody, to the Acton Line podcast. My name is Stephen Barrows. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Acton. I'm delighted to have with me today Joseph Lemoine.
That's correct. That's me.
Good.
Perfect pronunciation.
Perfect. That's good. And he's the Deputy Director of the Freedom and Prosperity Center at the Atlantic Council. So we've had the opportunity to collaborate with the Acton Institute with the Freedom and Prosperity Center, and they've got some exciting projects going on, especially a new index that has now been in its second edition released. And so I'm going to just begin a conversation today about the index and the research that the Freedom and Prosperity Center is conducting. And so first, Joseph, why don't you tell us a little bit about the center itself as part of the Atlantic Council, but tell us about the purpose of the center.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. It's a blast to be here, and I'm very happy to meet you in person because I've seen you, from
That's
from
right,
the box
the
of the
Zooms.
computer. Yeah, so it's great to be here. So thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely.
So the Freedom and Prosperity Center is part of the Atlantic Council, which is a large think tank in DC, and the think tank organizes its work around centers. There's 16 of them, and we're the newest center. We were created a year ago, so we're called Freedom and Prosperity. And our mission is to improve the life of the poor and marginalized everywhere, but with a special focus on developing countries. Mm-hmm. So questions about international development, democracy, freedom, the true nature of liberties, prosperity, all this is within our mandate. And yeah, that's who we are. This is a big endeavor, but we try to be active on all fronts. So if you want, I can give you a quick background about the kind of activities that we do, because when you do this work, you need to tackle all fronts. So we are a think tank, so we do advocacy. So we have events, we have publications. And we have a grant program with our friends at Atlas, where we finance think tanks in developing countries that are promoting our values and having actions on following our core principles. But our main mission is really to provide the research behind this message, because for a lot of us, it might be evident that freedom is the best way to prosperity. But clearly today, a lot of the world think differently. So our main goal is really to do some research, to provide tools, to actually see if it is true, if freedom is the best way to prosperity. But once we have those tools, to make them available to the largest public possible, to help governments take actions, grassroots movements take actions, the regular citizen take actions towards a world where prosperity is achievable and where freedom is not just an idea but a reality. And on this front, this is where we worked with the Acton Institute. We have a grant program on research. So we give money to scholars to use our indexes. So we'll talk more about the indexes later, but to use our products to conduct research that are looking into those topics.
That's great. It seems to me that when we first began collaborating a little over a year ago, it was such a perfect opportunity for Acton to work together with the Freedom and Prosperity Center. In part, of course, Acton has done a number of years projects, documentaries, including our Poverty Cure series and Poverty Inc., our documentary on international development and trade. And of course, as our mission at the Acton Institute to promote a free and virtuous society, it was very natural then for us to have the conversations about the research that we were doing and what you all were pursuing. And quite frankly, when I saw the initial index, I thought, oh wow, this is great. This is such good evidence for the that freedom does lead to prosperity. So I'd like to kind of shift gears and focus now from what you do at the center and the overarching mission to the reports and the research that's being conducted that has culminated in this index. So can you describe for me a little bit about this index and what you're seeking to accomplish and maybe its various components and so forth?
Absolutely. Actually, I'm excited to talk about it because the new version just came out last Thursday. So today at the session at the Acton University, thank you for the invitation.
Yes.
That will be the first time presenting the findings and presenting the new products. So this
that's
is very,
fantastic.
Very exciting to us. We really spent the past year improving our methodology, partnering with scholars to make it the best product possible. What it is actually two indexes, one that measures freedom and one that measures prosperity. We cover 164 countries from 1995 to 2022. So we have the geographical coverage and the time coverage to do some actual substantive research, and with the goal to see how the two interact. So that's why we separated the two, to actually see if one leads to the other, which way does it go? Is it a feedback loop? And all those questions that have been, written and researched about for a long time. We're trying to contribute to the conversation. It is unique because, like I just said, we separate the two, but also our definition of freedom is holistic. So there's a lot of great indexes that exist. Heritage and Fraser do a great job at measuring economic freedom.
Sure.
Freedom House look at political freedom. The World Justice Project looks at the legal freedom or the rule of law. What we did is we compiled those three components. That gives you a holistic view on how exactly a country, how free is a country, and exactly where this country is lacking or where this country is doing well, which gives you really a big picture approach and the ability of see all those gaps that are in freedom.
So just real quick, the three are the legal, the economic, and the political. Those are the various measures of freedom that you're using on the one side of the equation, and then taking a look at various forms of prosperity. So you're covering a much greater ground because, of course, freedom isn't merely economic freedom. There's the other two dimensions as you mentioned.
Exactly, and our research shows that actually having those three freedoms together is the most effective way to get to prosperity. So it might be that, one, depending on the context, it might be more important for you to, improve your political freedom or your rule of law, fix your corruption, or provide more freedom on the markets. But the formula, if you look at global trends and if you look at the entire sample, the three of them together is the best way to get to prosperity. And like you said, prosperity, our definition of prosperity is a modern definition of it. So we look at more than just income per capita. We look at education and health, which is also common measurements, but we also look at the environment, inequality, and minority rights, where we use religious freedom as a proxy to measure that particular component.
That's great. Yes, when I think about it, so often prosperity is reduced to material terms, oftentimes with, say, a per capita GDP number, which does, of course, give you some interesting information, and we always like to see increased material prosperity. But there's more to that, especially when you think of the full scope of human flourishing. I know that we have a poverty center at the Acton Institute, and we're examining more broadly what it means to flourish and what enables people to move from a place of poverty into a full flourishing, not simply material wealth, but other aspects, access to institutional justice, equal treatment under the law, minority rights, religious freedom. So were there any particular reasons why you chose? I think there were 6 of them: inequality, income inequality, minority rights, the environment, education, and health. Were those different dimensions? Okay.
Yes. So whenever you're going to build a prosperity index, it's going to be subjective in some capacity.
Sure.
So if you ask me, my definition of prosperity is going to be different from someone else, right? But then, these measures are commonly used, and very importantly, there is data available. So we had many conversations to narrow down to those measurements that people think should be included, and then we had to cut down a few because of lack of data. So, for example, we were hoping to include productivity, but we were not able to include it. And we were able to. I was hoping to include crime in it, but that as well, there is no good data that covers the entire world for
I could
28
imagine.
years.
The data collection problem must be a challenge.
Yes. And in many countries, the data is poorly reported, undermined, and so on. So there is all those challenges. But what our vision when producing these indexes is really transparency. And that means that all the sources that we use are available, and we cite exactly what we use. But it also means that we gave equal weight to every single component, which makes the indexes very clean. So you might disagree and think that income per capita is actually more important than education. I might think something differently.
Sure, right.
But our objective was really to make this data available to people, for them to use it, and if they think differently, they can do research. And that's why we give grants to scholars to actually do research using those data and maybe find different findings than that we did.
So let me ask you, what did you find the first time around, and were there any interesting updates with the second release of the index?
So this, in the first iteration of the report last year, we had only data from 2011 to 2022, and only in 5-year increments, so 2011, 2021. We had correlation, and we had a suspicion of some causal links that was in there, but the lack of data, we were not able to show this. With this new report, we have data. We have 100,000 data points. We have data for every single year, for every single country on every single component.
That's great.
And that gives us the opportunity to do more analysis. And the main one and the most compelling one is we looked at how changes in freedom led to changes in prosperity. So looking at those countries that went in a certain direction, either up or down on freedom, and what was the impact on prosperity. And so we found that if you're going to improve your prosperity, if you're going to improve your freedom, that's going to lead to an improvement in prosperity. If you're going to decrease your freedom, that's going to lead to a decrease in prosperity. So that was the most exciting findings, because this gets us closer. You can never prove causality, but that gets us much closer to it. And we also tested the other way around, because many would argue that prosperity comes first and then you get more freedom. But the relationship was weaker. So it really starts with freedom. It might be a feedback loop, but it starts with freedom and goes to prosperity.
As I recall, when you took a look at changes over time, you had at least one example, and I'm sure many of the listeners know what has happened to Venezuela over the years with increasing autocracy and a suppression of freedoms throughout that country. And then if you take a look at another Latin American country, I think it may have been Peru, you saw a trend in the opposite direction, more freedom in its various forms, whether political, economic, or legal. And so do you recall what the outcome was when you examined those two countries? And can you explain what the observations were?
Yeah, so Venezuela is the biggest drop in freedom in the sample, and it's the biggest drop in prosperity.
Oh, interesting.
So, and Peru, especially in the late 90s and early 2000s, had very pro-freedom reforms, and that led to more prosperity. And at the starting point in 1995, Venezuela was more free than Peru, and Venezuela was more prosperous than Peru. If you go to 2022, they flipped position. So it's a pretty clear example of those trends. And there is more in the sample. We did analysis comparing former Soviet bloc countries and comparing their trajectory, those that pick freedoms, Estonia, Lithuania, and so on, compared to those that didn't, Belarus, Russia, and
yes.
Ukraine.
Yeah.
And there's an evident trend. You see them go in completely opposite direction. So there are many examples there. I look forward to finding all of these, because obviously when you have 100,000 data points, there's a lot of work to be done, but they are there.
Exactly. I mean, just the opportunity to mine the data and see what it's going to demonstrate. And so far, the hypothesis that increased freedom leads to increased prosperity is bearing itself out in the data that you've examined thus far. So, another thing that I find intriguing about the index and the work that you're doing there at the center is you will sometimes hear people make the case that you can still have lots of prosperity. Now, I think in most cases they would just be defining this as material prosperity, say, an income per capita, and still have sort of a totalitarian or very controlled economy, something like what you see in China. And so they would point to China and say, look at this. This is an example of, hey, you don't have to have completely freedom of law, legal freedom and political freedom. You can still have this kind of prosperity. Well, does China, have you examined what that demonstrates, their kind of model, and whether or not that is something that's sustainable and that it proves the point that people are trying to say it proves?
Yeah, the elephant in the room.
Yes, right, exactly.
So it is true that China is, in recent history, the country that lifted the most people out of poverty.
Sure,
this
right.
is a fact that is widely accepted. But like you said, prosperity is not just income per capita. So first of all, on income per capita, today China is still a middle income country. They didn't. They're stuck in what we call the middle income trap.
Yes.
Which is very difficult to get out of, and it seems that latest reports show that actually they might be leading to a recession, and their income per capita might decrease in the near future. But to put it in perspective, there's not a rich country when you look just at income per capita. And then if you take the whole picture of prosperity using those 6 indicators that we use, they rank 119 out of 164.
Oh, wow.
So when you have a holistic view of prosperity, you quickly realize that this idea that the income per capita is the only thing that matters, which is their definition of human rights is human materialistic improvement.
Sure.
It is not the full answer, at least if you believe in those definition of prosperity.
Absolutely. Well, I can certainly see that, and you can also, as you pointed out, the per capita income over there is still not as high as people might assume when they hear that it is the second largest GDP in the world. But yeah, of course, they have so many people that the per capita is not nearly as impressive as their economic growth as a whole. Certainly, the urbanization and migration they had, in spite of the lack of freedom, they did have, you might call, a demographic dividend for a period of time. But now they're going to find the consequences of that one-child policy, that they're finding themselves in a real pickle. So that's a whole other topic, perhaps, for another podcast. But yes, I think it's very interesting that what the data show.
Yeah, and if you look at neighboring countries, there is a very striking example. Is if you compare the trajectory of South Korea, Taiwan, and China, they were at the same level of development after World War II. And all of them were a form of autocratic government, right?
Sure.
They all implemented some kind of market reform, capitalistic reforms. But then South Korea and Taiwan flipped and took the path of democracy. And when they did, you see that their prosperity skyrocketed. And now they're so much ahead of China. By our metrics, both South Korea and Taiwan are considered free and prosperous, whereas China is still considered mostly unfree and mostly unprosperous.
Interesting. So I'm sure that many, if not most, of our listeners are from the United States. And so I'm curious, do you recall some things that the data revealed about the United States? Where does the U.S. fit into the broader picture of freedom and prosperity? And even if there's been any movements over the time period that you've examined?
So the U.S. is obviously a free and prosperous country.
Sure.
It is. I don't remember the exact rankings, but I think it's in the top 30 on both categories.
Yes. Yeah.
Both rankings tend to be led by Nordic European countries, which much easier to run small countries than to run big countries.
That's an interesting way to put it. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. But we didn't look too much into it because really it is not the mission of our center.
Sure.
We have a focus on developing countries. The conversation whether the U.S. should be ranked 20 or 15 is not our mandate.
Right.
But you can use the data. You can look at what happened. You can explore the U.S. and compare with the EU and so on. But our focus is really how to get those countries that are struggling to join this group where
Yes.
the U.S. is part of.
So that's interesting. You bring up the idea you can explore those things. What kind of things can people do with your index? Can you go to the website and just examine different countries over time, or what's available for people who want to learn more about the index and its usefulness?
Yeah, I'm very glad you asked because we just launched last week a new website where you can explore the entire data set. So you have your typical world map when you can look at each country and look into the details. But then you have all those tools that allow you to compare countries on every single metrics that you're interested in. And at any time you can download exactly the data that you're looking at. You can compare your countries with different regions, with different groups, with your neighboring countries, and so on. So it is a gold mine. There's a lot of information there. I encourage everybody to go check it out. It's on the Atlantic Council. It's listed on our website on the Freedom and Prosperity Center at the Atlantic Council. And actually, yesterday, our designers just told us that the website will be featured in a design magazine because it's so excellent.
That's great.
So we're
Congratulations.
Thank you. I mean, congratulations to them. They did a great job. But it is very exciting, and it really fits our objective of making this information available to the largest crowd possible.
That's great. I'm so glad you're here with us at Acton University because Acton University is a very international conference. We have over 80 countries represented here, participants and so forth. And so as you give your talk here at Acton University about the index, it would be great. And hopefully there'll be a number of people from other countries around the world, particularly those in the developing world, that have an opportunity to explore where their country is and perhaps where they measure and need improvements, both on the freedom side, then leading to, of course, the prosperity side. So it's great to be able to share that index with individuals here, and we hope that people visit the website. I do also want to ask you, with our time remaining here, about the grant opportunities that we have. I know that we've been working together evaluating grants, applications, and so forth. What you've already mentioned Atlas as well as Acton. If people want to find out more how they might apply their own scholarship to the index, what opportunities are out there?
The opportunities are listed on our website and on the Acton website. Just look for Freedom and Prosperity research grants. Really, any research that uses our indexes is welcome. Right now, the most exciting project that we have is a research on the role of religion, freedom, and prosperity and how they interact in sub-Saharan Africa.
Oh, interesting.
So this is a project that I'm very excited to see go to see it to happen. Yeah.
Right.
But really, any interest that aligns with what we do, and there is a lot that we do, is more than welcome. So, yeah.
Well, that's great to hear. I must say that there's such a need to help with economic growth and prosperity across the globe. We know that there's been a substantial increase in prosperity over the past century, a decline in extreme poverty and so forth, but there are these other measures that we don't want to lose sight of. And so this is a welcome contribution to the discussion as we seek to equip and provide tools and education to individuals and countries across the globe on those things which can help people flourish.
Yeah, and so far I think we gave 16 grants from scholars from 10 different countries. So we have Nigeria, we have Egypt, we have Mexico, and so on. So anybody's welcome, and the more diverse, the better.
That's fantastic. Well, Joseph Lemoine, we're so glad that you could join us here both at Acton University and for the Acton Line podcast. I have been to your website. It's a terrific website, just as they have indicated through their award. And I invite all of our listeners to explore it. The Freedom and Prosperity Center at the Atlantic Council, you can find it and explore yourself and take a look at what these countries appear and where your country might fall on the list. So looking forward to continual output from the center and as we all strive to help individuals achieve a flourishing life. So thank you so much, Joseph.
Thank you so much.
As always, thank you for listening. Our team loves putting this podcast together for you. It's encouraging to hear from our listeners. Feedback is incredibly important to us because it lets us know what you'd like to hear more of, including the kinds of topics you're interested in most. If you have comments, feedback, or ideas for a show topic or interesting guest, you can email our team at producer@acton.org. Until next week, for Acton Line, I'm Eric Cohn.